And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, well, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at coalitionradio.us, where videos, articles, dissertations, rants, diatribes, all of the above can be found going back from 2013 forward. Literally touching on every, what we like to call here at the Coalition, every third rail issue imaginable. Tonight won't be any different, except it'll probably just be a little bit more of a calmer, mature conversation than sometimes we're used to here. Anyone who knows me on the Facebook or knows me politically understands that the little, I don't know, the little symbol, what's the little thing they put up on the, it's supposed to be you, and very often it's a picture or a meme. Well, for quite a while, I've had a button that says, I'm already against the next war. That's not for cosmetic effect. That's not for to virtue signal. That's not for me to pearl clutch. That's not for me to do any of the normal things that people seem to obsess over on social media. I'm against war. I'm against all war. I'm against borders. I believe that wars and borders are an imposition, and this is my personal opinion, not that of my guests. We'll find out how they feel. But I believe all of that is an imposition about people, to divide people, to incur hate, to incur divisiveness, and also to create power and wealth for those who would inflict these situations upon us. Therefore, I believe it is commensurately easy to end wars than we think it is. Wars are for profit. Wars are for power. Wars are for control. Wars are what we sometimes call here in the Coalition, operate change the subject. When a scandal hits a president, what do? We bomb an aspirin factory. When scandals and impeachment proceedings hit another president, what do? We step up our activities in Syria, or we pretend the things that we're going to do or maybe not do in Yemen, or we engage in arms sales to appease individual parts of the population who will then engage in their own virtue signaling. Well, we don't tolerate that here. As we like to say in our tagline, we are outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media. A group of folks that I've just had the opportunity to meet digitally, if you will, because this is the age of COVID, over the last few weeks, I believe have taken over a substantial period of time against the winds of, if you will, of the common culture, at times at great sacrifice to them personally, a highly principled stand that they have put into action by engaging in protest, civil disobedience, and an aggressive, professionally run, if you will, I don't want to diminish it by using this term, but a marketing campaign against these same powers. And when the situation with Yemen, particularly in the post-Trump presidency, seemed to be becoming equally unhinged, campaign promises met, some not met, some ignored. I had the opportunity to meet these people digitally. These are folks who I believe live their cause, as I try to think I would try to do. And in doing so, there's a nobility attached to that, sometimes challenging, sometimes that level of quiet personal sacrifice made on a daily basis, that I want to, in the coming years, coming weeks, spend a little bit more time investigating, because there are principled people among us of every background, persuasion, ethnicity, you name it, all of the above, who will simply do the right thing quietly because it's the right thing to do. Paul Shannon and Louise Coleman join us tonight. They are principals involved in what's called the Raytheon anti-war campaign. This is a coalition of anti-war peace and action community groups from literally, everywhere. And I'm going to let them sort of define themselves, but it's a story worth telling. It's compelling, and here's the important point. It's easily accessible for anyone in our communities, whether a lot of these folks happen to be from the greater Boston area. Other folks you'll meet and you'll see us interview in the coming months, years, however long it takes, are from literally around the globe. And all I ask of folks is to listen carefully and try and find. I don't know if it's possible to mirror their personal commitment, but you can sure as hell try. And we're going to find out tonight and in the future why it's so damned important. Paul and Louise, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the coalition for the very first time.
Thank you, Pat. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I hope this is the beginning of a long friendship because, as I mentioned while we were kind of jiggling the cables and getting things configured, call me the cynic in the crew. I'm from New Jersey. I'm older. I'm Irish, so we're bitter poets, if you will. I don't see a sudden outbreak of peace on the horizon, not for the lack of trying and serious commitment that you folks and your organizations have made to it. With that in mind, give us, if you will, a little bit of the history of the coalition. Equally important, the organizations involved with it, and I know there's a lot of local flavor there. So just give us the background. Give us the 411.
Okay, well, just before doing that, Pat, I just, and along the lines that you were just speaking, right after President Biden announced that he might try to end this war in Yemen, the chairman of the board of the CEO of Raytheon said, look, peace is not going to break out in the Middle East anytime soon. I think it remains an area where we'll continue to see solid growth. So I don't think Raytheon right now has to worry about peace. And that's why we're on their tail a little bit. The campaign began this way, Pat. We all started reading stories about this disaster going on in the country of Yemen, a country we didn't even know where it was, of course. But you couldn't ignore it completely. Every now and then you'd get a sense of how many children were starving, of the bombing going on, found here in Massachusetts an institution that was directly involved in that war. In other words, even though Yemen seemed to be very, very far away, the reality is that the war in Yemen is partially organized right here in our own state. We found out that Raytheon, not only does it make weapons for this war, that it makes money by selling of all governments, to Saudi Arabia, but it is also involved intimately with the U.S. government. The new Secretary of Defense, for instance, is on the board of Raytheon. Well, he isn't right now. Theoretically, he's off.
Right.
While he's Secretary of Defense. Raytheon hires 19 different lobbying groups. It has its own internal lobbying operation. It has a monster of a PAC to make contributions to candidates. When President Biden was putting together his foreign policy, he invited 2 directors of Raytheon to join the other 11 people to brief him on foreign policy. We found that Raytheon has been in Saudi Arabia for 50 years. It has 400 employees working there now, servicing the Saudi military. So whatever Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen, and the story is quite a remarkable one. Not only the United States, but us here in Massachusetts, through Raytheon and some other companies are intimately involved. So that's why we started the campaign, as a way of giving people in Massachusetts a way to protest this war, a way to say we do not want to be responsible for the starvation of these tens of thousands of children, the destruction of an entire country, for the wiping out of an infrastructure, for what's often called the greatest humanitarian catastrophe going on in the world today. We are sick of being part of this, and we're going to give Raytheon one heck of a time until they stop helping out to carry out this war. But those were my thoughts. I don't know, Louise, what were your ideas in terms of why you got involved in this?
Well, I've always been really very interested in things that are against nuclear weapons, and Raytheon produces nuclear weapons, and it takes all sorts of money away from things that people really need, like housing and medical care and vaccinations, and uses for nuclear weapons. And it's getting scarier and scarier. And it was just so interesting that Raytheon is right here in Massachusetts. I mean, it's like when we're doing standouts, sometimes we just go to their offices and just stand there. And it's fascinating because, again, it's like it's in Yemen, which is far away. It's one of the places where they're operating, but it's also right here. One of the people I've been talking to recently is with the Merrimack Valley People for Peace. And they have, and they're up in Andover, Mass., but they have for years and years and years, every Thursday morning at 7 o'clock, they're at the Raytheon building on Route 133. But, it's like they go and they just protest and stand out there and they make an effort. They are, giving voice to something that really needs to be in the public eye. So I really admire them. Their oldest person is 86. So to be out there at 7 o'clock in the morning is quite an accomplishment. So there is an assortment of people who are really very aware of what's happening and trying to hold Raytheon accountable. I mean, it's also, this is an auspicious time. Floyd Austin has been on the board of Raytheon, but on the other hand, he, at least initially, was very against the war in Yemen. I think that it's possible to sort of see what we can do about salvaging whatever anti-war sentiment there is, and make use of it, and make President Biden aware that we really want to end this horrible situation. It's not good. It's terrible even for our economy. I mean, it's like, why should people put their retirement funds in Raytheon? Right. So it's very intrinsic. There's all of those kinds of things to take into account. We'll see what we can do.
So it brings to mind a couple of questions. Excuse me. The first off is what is the state of the anti-war movement in America now? We remember back just a few years, not so long ago, I should say, when Code Pink and Ms. McKinney and a number of folks had really, during the Bush administration, put the hammer down and routinely challenged the Bush administration about a lot of their policies, everything ranging from ultimately what became known as the internal spying scandal to, again, being a proxy for the defense state, ultimately being the particularly under the ever scary guise of Dick Cheney, whichever secret location he happened to be hidden in at that moment when he wasn't taking shotgun blasts to his buddies hunting. I'm sorry, brings up a lot of old memories, if you will.
Those were the days, Pat.
Well, again, bitter Irish poets never forget. We just don't. It's part of our. It's part of our DNA. I don't know what I had for dinner, but I can remember all the political slights ever accorded to me in a lifetime.
That's great.
it's not sure if it's healthy, but it can be interesting. But so you had an anti-war movement that was very, very visible because of the atrocities going on, if you will, in the Middle East. Now, simultaneously, on the political front, you had an active anti-war movement on what would commonly referred to as the left. On the right, you had the ascension of Ron Paul politically, and who became a political leader for a whole lot of veterans, particularly younger veterans who served overseas during, Desert Storm 1, Desert Storm 2, whichever twisted cliche they came up with, who left, I guess, full of optimism and American spirit and a lot of bravery, came home with a lot of bravery and a pretty cynical view of the perspective of American foreign policy. And so on the libertarian, and I hate to use the word right with libertarians, but let's just say on the libertarian wing of the political spectrum, you had developing a potent anti-war movement, which reinvigorated, I believe, the libertarian movement here in this nation, because we are, like most political movements, fractured internally on virtually every issue except ending wars and except bringing our brave young men and women home and right now. And we all agree that the ultimate way to provide respect for someone serving in our military is to make sure that they never fight another needless police action on behalf of the corporate state. So, that's the perspective that I was sort of birthed into, if you will. I'm not a veteran, but I've gotten to know many folks younger than me who've served nobly, but remain troubled about what they were involved in to this very day. So where in your opinion, long build up to a short question, what is the state of the anti-war movement here in the United States, in your opinion?
Well, along the lines of what you just said, Pat, remember that anti-war movement was built on military families. That families who had kids in Iraq was saying, "What the heck is this all about? We've been lied to. My kid's life is in danger." I mean, you had a massive upsurge of military families. They organized an organization here in Massachusetts that we worked with constantly to put pressure on the Bush administration, and then when Obama first came in to end that war. So they were a backbone, a key part of that massive anti-war movement that people forget. The only reason that Obama won the nomination in 2008 over Hillary Clinton was the fact that he had voted against the Iraq War, whereas Hillary had voted for it. And so that, however, was the last time that the anti-war movement was big enough to exert that type of force on the U.S. government. Since then, things have become very complicated in the country. Our military budgets, of course, have continued to soar, and resources have been drained from other maybe useful programs like public health. But the interest in what's happening overseas has just dwindled tremendously. And yet, just really important events are taking place over there. So that's what we're trying to do is resurrect that sense that as citizens, we have a responsibility to think about our foreign policy and to decide whether it's destructive or positive or whatever, and to do something about it. And so that is our long-range goal, not only in regard to Yemen, but in regard to many of these other so-called trouble spots that we keep putting our fingers into to try to accomplish whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. And so, it's a problem for us. We're also involved in a lot of these other social movements, whether it's on racial justice or on housing that people can afford, or jobs that people can work and be able to support their families. We try to connect all these issues as much as we can and try to help more and more people to see that these issues are connected to what we're doing overseas. And that we just do not have the luxury of ignoring what our country is doing and what is happening to the soldiers, or what the soldiers are doing to people in other countries. We just don't have the luxury of ignoring that, just because the situation here has become very, very tense and complicated. We especially want to work with the climate folks, the people working on climate change. Mm-hmm. Unless the folks working on climate change see that as long as we have a militarized society, there's no way we can succeed in dealing with the climate catastrophe. And likewise, unless we deal with the climate catastrophe, there's no way that we can stop these wars because of the interconnections between these things. So it's we're really hopeful that more and more people are starting to catch on to the importance of what's happening overseas. To wondering about what their country's foreign policy is, and wanting to bring that foreign policy in line with our values as people who want a positive relationship with the world and don't want to keep on building aircraft carriers while dangers of little viruses are out there bringing our country to its knees, and we don't even see them coming because our full focus is on these demons abroad.
Absolutely. What other organizations, when I think traditionally of the peace movement, of course, I think of the Friends, Society of Friends, and of course, IKA, the Quakers. What other organizations are you drawing from nationally to create this anti-war campaign?
Well, the Massachusetts Peace Action has relationships with all sorts of peace action groups in other states, and also with organizations in Massachusetts. There are people working on ending nuclear weapons, on all sorts, and on having money spent on healthcare instead of warfare. And the climate change is really, really interesting. I mean, as I think, like Paul mentioned, a lot of this, it's very intrinsic. It all goes around and around and around. But it's, I think that I think Mass Peace Action has a great website. If people wanted to go on that and just see all the different working groups. And it's really important for people to make an effort for whatever they can do because it's not like it's like everything is sort of closing in. I mean, the whole thing with climate change. I mean, the fact that Texas is such a wreck right now, basically a failed state. I mean, the people in power there did nothing to ensure the public good. So that way everybody's freezing. It's not like things aren't far away anymore. They're closing in.
The chickens, as they say, have come home to roost, if you will.
Our campaign is really a coalition of groups. We work with Veterans for Peace, who've been very active for many, many years, nationally and locally. We work with the Committee for Social Justice of the Quakers in Cambridge. They're a key part of our organization. We work with American Friends Service Committee, another organization started by the Quakers. We work with the United Movement Against U.S. War, a group of young people. United Against War and Militarism, I guess is the correct name. We have the campaign for peace, disarmament, common security. We have about 6 or 7 organizations from Massachusetts as part of our campaign, and then we in turn relate to some of the groups that you mentioned, Pat. Code Pink is a national leadership group. Peace Action operates nationally. The Friends Committee on National Legislation, another Quaker-based type of organization. And so we all stay in touch with each other, trying to figure out the answer to the question you raised. Where is the peace movement these days? And the peace movement is there. We're all involved in other efforts that we consider crucial to human welfare. But we try to keep alive the idea that wars are also have to be on everyone's agenda, not just the peace movement. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we'll see how Biden goes. We had hopes about him ending the Yemen war. Today there was a press conference which was very discouraging, where his diplomatic guy and what's his name, Lender King, did a press conference which is just horrendous, blaming the Houthis for the war in Yemen and not the Saudis. So we've got a long way to go, but I think people are sick and tired of constantly going to war. And I think people are sympathetic to people in other countries who want to be left in peace. Right. And I think there's something to build on there. That's what we're hoping on. And there's no way that we can continue to be Sparta, that we can be a fortress, a militarized fortress, and at the same time solve the urgent problems, the problems that are in fact ruining lives here. This pandemic, so many other crises like this, the polarization in our country that we absolutely have to overcome in order to move forward as a country. These are the issues that we should be focused on, not what the hell we're doing in Yemen, for God's sakes. That's none of our business.
No, absolutely. And of course,
Well-
it bleeds into even our urban communities in terms of the racial strife that we suffer because of the constant presence of a militarized police force, which in fact is ultimately financed by surplus and or equipment and or funds from our overseas war aggressions. It's literally impacting us on Main Street. It's impacting us on in cities across the nation that have become majority cities, where you've got still the vestiges of an oppressive police force who use techniques like stop and frisk despite their overall constitutional prohibition. With the wink, wink, nod, nod. This all came together, I think, beautifully just a few short weeks ago. You folks were involved with ultimately an international event that was keynoted by a political figure that I see as very intriguing, and I'm talking about Congressman Ro Khanna. Tell us about the event. We publicized it here, but give folks a snapshot of who came together, what was the purpose, and what type of actions, if you will, individual actions were taking place across the country.
Well, this was a global day of action against the war in Yemen. Mm-hmm. And what it did, Pat, is it made little groups like ours aware that there were people all around the world that were concerned about the same things as us. Mm-hmm. And were concerned about what was happening to these kids in Yemen. And it just gave you this feeling of empowerment, namely that you had 350 organizations, medium-sized and small, come together to do something all on the same day. Mm-hmm. The demand was that Biden would, get us out of this war in the United States. But there were groups from 17 different countries involved. Right. And each of these groups did something in their countries. And these are countries which, in addition to the United States, are also selling weapons for the war that Saudi Arabia is conducting. And it was a wonderful experience. It put us in touch with Yemenis that we had not known. Yemenis who were now living in the United States and who could not find people who are interested in their country. And all of a sudden they saw all these people, thousands of people coming together around the world to express solidarity with their fellow citizens in Yemen and wanting to stop the war. So it was a very moving experience. We had a march through Boston. We started with a rally at the State House because at the State House, our Massachusetts state pension plan is invested in the companies that are selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. From there, and we had a wonderful Yemeni speaker talk about the need to end the war. We had Stephen Kinzer speak, a Globe columnist. We had some activists speak, and then from there we went to the Irish famine memorial in right downtown, and we had people speak there about how the Irish famine was a human creation. It was not due to agricultural failures, but rather was due to policies of the British government, and very similar to what's the famine going on in Yemen. Right. From there, we went to BlackRock investors that hold almost $4 billion of securities in Raytheon. And from there, we went to the United Arab Emirates consulate in Boston, who is doing its share to destroy Yemen for its own purposes. And so we touched on these different contact points around the Boston area that are involved in carrying on this war, and just issuing a general call. Please, everybody, get in touch with the White House, get in touch with your representatives, have rallies, do public educations, do webinars, do whatever you can to let the people of Yemen know that they're not forgotten, that people do care about it, and that we will continue until that war ends. We will continue these efforts. It's not just for their benefit, but for ours as well, so that we can hold our heads high again.
Right. I bring up the congressman because in just the last few days, he's gotten back involved in I'll call it a war of wills with the UAE, and it's interesting to me because on a public level here in the United States, United Arab Emirates, possibly because of some of their cooperation that happens at high level military levels, is given sort of a pass. They make some nice overtures to Israel. They're given a pass. But right now, it's my understanding the congressman is actively, shall we say, engaging the United States ambassador from UAE because of a journalist. And how refreshing, by the way, for the American government to actually not be screaming fake news and not be citing some made-up paranoid interpretation of if you will, of a jihad that allegedly the journalist community is taking on a president. We've got a United States congressman arguing for the release of a gentleman by the name of Adel El-Hassani, who is being held allegedly somewhere in southern Yemen with the full cooperation of the UAE. And so I'm intrigued, and I wonder if you could tell me a little bit what your perspective is on the congressman, because he seems just like a breath of fresh air in terms of having an understanding, a perspective of what American foreign policy in that part of the world should be. What's your experience been with watching the congressman?
Louise, what are your thoughts on Ro Khanna?
Well, I've only recently been made aware of the activities, but no, I just think it's great to have people in Congress doing what they're supposed to do, which is to challenge, to try to find out what's really going on, and to do what they can for citizens. So, I would be certainly in favor of, and also whatever is happening with the reporter, getting a reporter out of where they are.
Right. The
Ro Khanna has stepped up as an amazing champion, just of common sense. The first time I heard him speak was about 5 or 6 years ago. I could not believe that a congressperson was actually speaking common sense and was actually talking about how the world works and about how we need a different relationship with that world, and then ticking off one disastrous war after another and saying that these things have to end. One of the main things he's doing, Pat, is he's trying to force through the passage of a war powers resolution that would prevent the president from starting wars without congressional approval. Now, you would think that's in the Constitution. However, it turns out that when the people in Congress read the Constitution, for some reason that passage was left out somewhere, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so any president can start a war whenever he wants. Of course, all he has to do is scream that the demons are out to get us.
Right.
And Ro Khanna is leading that fight to make sure that the president just can't start a war whenever he wants. That would go a long way toward helping us out, because not that the people in Congress are against war, but they don't want people back home to know that they're supporting it. And if it comes before Congress, then people are going to have to take a vote.
Right.
And they don't want to do that.
No, that's the bogeyman for so many of our elected officials, being forced to commit on the record with respect to a particular issue. And I'm talking about everyday issues. Is it raining out? Well, let's talk about this. From your perspective, there may be a due formation taking place. Yeah, I mean that's the kind of conversations you have here. I mean, you here in Rhode Island where I live, we're treated to the notion of having a guy named Jack Reed, who is the senior senator from Rhode Island, a graduate of the United States Military Academy, and who has become, in addition with the rest of the Rhode Island congressional delegation, a complete bought and paid for, if you will, arm, if you will, of the much cliched but still very serious military-industrial complex. With Raytheon having a significant presence on Aquidneck Island in Rhode Island, you can only imagine the love fest that goes on when you've got a ranking member like Jack Reed, who's often been named as a potential defense secretary because of his background. Except, of course, we'd much rather have someone who is literally, as you guys have mentioned, just off the board of Raytheon. And I've got. We've elected a president, and I'm, again, full disclosure, I'm chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. This is my effort on the coalition. I'm the owner of the Coalition Radio Network, if you will, for what that's worth. And it is completely independent of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island, but I am what's called a radical libertarian. Which is why I'm so grounded in my opposition to war, amongst other things. But what's frustrating to me, and I'm not looking for you to indict the president per se, but there were two nominations, well, three in particular. Two of them really don't have anything to do with tonight's topic, but for the record, Cecilia Munoz was elected to the Transition Committee when she ultimately was one of the early architects of family separation during the Obama administration. I'm not big on borders either, you can probably tell. Most notably, though, you've got two important members of the president's cabinet who are, I don't know of a nice way to say it. From my perspective, just bought and paid for by the corporate machine. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Monsanto, as he's affectionately referred to, Vilsack, who's the agricultural secretary, and that's another conversation for another night. But I grew up in New Jersey. If you're called Mr. Monsanto, that's not a good thing. Okay, just not. There's no upside for your nickname, including the name of a Fortune 100 corporation. Just saying. But there were so many choices that Mr. Biden could have made with respect to the defense and state, for that matter. But let's talk about defense. What signal did it send to you after a campaign with which Mr. Biden stood in lockstep, at least rhetorically, with so many of your concerns? And what impact do you think his pronouncement relative to eliminating American involvement in Yemen really means?
Well, that's a good question. I think I have a little different take on Biden. One reason I do, Pat, is that I don't know you have feelings on this, but my feeling is that another 4 years of Trump would have been the end. It definitely would have finished off the planet. Climate change would have been impossible to stop, and his policies in so many different areas, building up the military, talking about using nuclear weapons. So to me, Biden's win was just a sense of relief. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to sound Pollyannish at all, but to me, it gave us a year or two of breathing space to raise issues and to begin maybe to move things in a new direction. Mm-hmm. You're right. Biden, remember, Biden was part of the Obama administration that started the war in Yemen.
Right.
Let's be clear on that. A lot of his people come out of a way of looking at the world through the glasses of empire. That's just the truth. However, over the last 4 years, the country has been through such tumult that I am hoping that there is a decency in Joe Biden that might be able to show through here. Mm-hmm. That is probably totally unrealistic, but I think there is a chance of that. And that I think that Biden realizes that things can't go on the way they were under Obama. Things have to change. Right. And he has to deal with some of these real issues. And it's in that context that I was very hopeful when he announced that we were going to stop supporting the war in Yemen. I still remain somewhat hopeful, but we have to keep an eye on him and what exactly he is up to with these new policies on Yemen. As long as we are in such a close love feast with Saudi Arabia, good things can't happen.
Right.
This is a catastrophic relationship, not just for us, but especially for the Middle East. And so I'm just hoping against hope that his new policy on Yemen will actually lead to a situation in which he allows the people of Yemen to decide their own future, instead of governments that we create for them and then bomb them into submission to force them to try to accept. That's my hope. I also hope that he might get us back into that Iran nuclear deal. A war with Iran would be a catastrophe for everyone involved. And I think there are areas where he may move. Israel, unfortunately, is not one of them. But I think he is more susceptible to public pressure than he and Obama were in the past, because the country is in such dire straits right now.
What impact? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Louise. I'm sorry.
No, I was just thinking. There are other positive things happening as well. Like on the 22nd of January, the treaty to outlaw nuclear weapons was passed. That makes. It doesn't make the countries that have nuclear weapons do anything right now, but it's sort of like what happened when chemical weapons were outlawed. That as it is right now, it's a treaty that was passed. It's a UN treaty, and that what would happen would be Raytheon wouldn't be able to make nuclear weapons anymore. So I guess I'm thinking about is trying to see things from other different perspectives as well. I think that this is a hopeful sign. This is a great treaty. Won Nobel Prize in 2017. And I think that if we, as people who are interested in peace, bring that up to people's attention more, there are other aspects, there are other things that can be done. We can put Raytheon out of business by not having them make $1 trillion more nuclear weapons, which is what's in the offing right now. So there are positives that can happen. And they all kind of tie together. The war in Yemen was, it's done with Raytheon. So there are ways out of it, basically.
No, I absolutely see your point. And let's look to a policy move unilaterally imposed by the Trump administration when they declared the Houthis a terrorist organization. The ramifications for that, what seems like to most Americans a simple pronunciation, based in fact that it wasn't, but let's just point that out there, that for most Americans they'll sort of kind of blankly stare at the screen. Okay, some people in some place I've never heard of have been declared terrorists, but ultimately that shut down. The impact on the humanitarian aid effort in Yemen was stunning. Now, to the Biden administration's credit, my understanding is that they've since reversed that. Have they? And what? Talk to me about the impact of a seemingly innocuous move like that by the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, what it does, Biden has gone ahead, as I understand it, and removed that designation. That means it allows businesses around the world to trade with Yemen. Remember, 80% of Yemen is controlled by the Houthis.
Right. They
are the nationalist movement of Yemen. Saudi Arabia is not a citizen of Yemen. The Houthis are Yemenis.
Right.
And so the fact that it would now allow Houthi areas to trade with the rest of the world is incredibly significant, very significant, if this is actually continues to be carried out. So that is also a step in the right direction.
Right.
It's the fear here is, what is the angle that Biden is playing? Mm-hmm. Is it really to end the war? Is it to establish a new type of relationship with Saudi Arabia? He certainly is not going to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia. He's talking about ending offensive arms sales. But it means that the Raytheon's Patriot missiles and all their other stuff can continue to be sold. Or is this the beginning of a new policy towards Saudi Arabia, in which Saudi Arabia is put on notice that we're not going to run their country for them anymore and protect them from their own people and from other people that they're hurting. It's a very fluid situation right now, and that's why this is the time for peace groups and everyone who's concerned about Yemen to raise their voices loud and clear to make sure that Biden is forced to stay on the peace track and not to just continue the war in Yemen in a somewhat different form.
And that's why I admire what you're doing so intensely. There's an old Jerry Seinfeld skit, and he jokes about, I don't know if you guys are Seinfeld fans or not, but I won't try to do an imitation, but he talks about rooting for laundry, and he talks about a Boston player that everyone in Boston loved. He was great. And then we traded him to the Yankees, and we hate him. Why?
Who was that?
I can't remember his name right now, but he was. But the point being that if I can simplify it, because again, I'm a kid from Jersey. You guys aren't rooting for laundry. You're focused on the issues, regardless of whether it's red, blue, or as we had for a very short period of time last year, a gold. Congress. We did have a libertarian congressman in there for a few short months, and it was great. First thing he did was try to end some of the issues surrounding police force in the inner cities. So that's a critical point, isn't it? Easiest statement of the week I'll make. It's time for Americans to put aside their political laundry, if you will, and simply look to a humanitarian nightmare like this, understand that we're a precipitative force in it, and we, as Americans, have the ability to demand that we remove, quite simply, ourselves from being said precipitative force, and automatically things will at least get better. It might not cure everything, but am I oversimplifying things here? Is it really that straightforward?
No, I think that you're not simplifying it. The other possibility, the other problem is nuclear weapons. I mean, we have to stop making nuclear weapons. And they're all, it's like the president can start a war in a half an hour and wipes everybody out. And the only people profiting from that are people like the people who invest in Raytheon. So there has to be a whole new way of taking stock of where we are and what we have to do to keep going.
Yeah, and I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think what you said in terms of red and blue. My hope would be that we could. I'm terrified of what happened on January 6th. Mm-hmm. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign, and I don't think the different sides involved in this understand each other very well. And my hope would be that it might be possible for red and blue to find things that they do agree on and start by working together on those.
Right.
And if that is successful, then it can lead to much better communication. So what we can understand why we live in such different worlds, because that issue in itself is something staring us right in the face. That just has to be related to the different parties in this. Each of us has to see our involvement in how this mess and how this scary situation developed. Right. That Yemen anti-war stuff, I think, could be an area where we are able to come together, because I don't think the American public supports these wars anymore. They want to pretend that they're not happening, but if a president got up there and said, we're going to go to war with Russia right now, I don't think that would be too popular. And so I think we have to build on that sentiment and get our attention focused on what this country could be like if we put our minds to it and turned it into something that we could be proud of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, just a bit of trivia here. We call ourselves the Coalition Radio Network. The show, The Coalition, started in 2013, and it was essentially an attempt to accomplish exactly what you're talking about. It's my belief as one of the founders that there are folks who are on the quote-unquote political left, and there are folks who are on the quote-unquote political, I'll call it, I hate to say right, because that's become tinged with so many things, but libertarians are generally accorded to be on the right, yet we bear no similarities to Republicans whatsoever, regardless of what a few civics teachers and a few Republicans think. We're so much cooler than Republicans. They all want to say they're libertarian leaning until, of course, you ask them about borders, and well, that goes downhill pretty quickly. But there are so many things that we agree on. Ending wars, reimagining. I mean, I'm all about not even just defunding the police. I'm all about ending the police and then starting from scratch, understanding that there needs to be some element of law enforcement to protect people in society. It has nothing at all like it become in our current society. There are 100 different areas where the quote-unquote progressive left and the libertarian quote-unquote right agree on. And it's the concept behind this show was to explore those areas, work on them, solve all those problems, and in 30 or 40 years that we can get pissed off at each other again for something that we don't even remember. And there are areas of difference. I mean, we probably look at economics a little bit differently, but there are so many exigent issues right now that require care and feeding now, as in after we get off the air, we all need to get back to work now. That let's continue to develop a relationship between people of different politics who ultimately are looking to achieve the same things. And it sounds simplistic. It's harder in practice. My personal experience has been when you have a coalition and you use that word and you actually believe in that word, that you can accomplish great things. That when one political organization seeks ownership of an issue with a capital O, that's ultimately a road to failure. And I can cite countless examples of both. So I'm very hopeful after having had the opportunity to meet with you folks. And here's a couple of reasons why. Not just the rhetoric, not just the philosophy, not the way that your organization put philosophy into practice, but it just the entire package. And part of that, we always have a part towards the end of the show where we engage in what we call shameless self-promotion, where you give folks, before you sign off, an opportunity with some lists of some websites to go to. And normally I just turn that over to you, but there's a couple of things that I found remarkable being on your mailing lists right now. A number of folks in your organization on a couple of times a week, and I'm glad to see them. I don't consider them spam at all because they're content rich, are updating people on perspectives on a whole lot of different issues, keying into a bunch of events that are taking place in person and virtually in the Boston area as well as around the country. What's remarkable, I guess, Mr. Harrison of your organization puts together a peace and justice calendar once a week, and which is which is just feature rich with stuff. It's speeches, it's events, it's wonderul.
Webinar.
Yeah,
it is wonderful.
It is,
Yep.
and it'll be my mission to whenever possible to amplify some of the events that are going on there, because it's the reinforcement of ideals and of facts independent of political spin, which has taken over so much of our mainstream media, if you will. And there's plenty of resources on both sides, so I always get a kick when one side or the other claims that, what do they say, call the ambulance? That the other side, please spare me. Each of you have your own house pravdas, and just be happy with that. So when I see independent folks putting together, really meaty presentations, this is the type of stuff that needs to be amplified and the community needs to find out more about. So tell us about where folks can find you on the web, how folks can sign up for these newsletters, and can just get this continual rush of real information about real issues.
Well, the person you mentioned, Cole Harrison, he's the executive director of Massachusetts Peace Action, and he has really reinvigorated the group and expanded its reach tremendously, has developed relationships with numerous social change organizations throughout Massachusetts. And so we continue to work. I'm on the executive committee of Mass Peace Action. Louise is a member, and we continue to work to establish ties with, with groups on some really, really important issues, and especially to bring in the peace issue into that whole mix. So the first thing that I would like to propose is that if you are interested in helping us stop the war in Yemen, that you contact the Raytheon Anti-War Committee, and you can do that by you can call me at 617-623-5288. That's the most direct way right now in COVID, since our office is closed down, of course. But you could just Google Mass Peace Action, Massachusetts Peace Action, and on their website, as you say, Pat, there are ways of contacting all these different projects that this organization is involved in, including the Raytheon Anti-War Campaign. And people will find there educational events, some of which will be of interest to them, that they can watch. And then after they've watched them, Mass Peace Action will send you an email with how you can get involved, or how you can do this or that or whatever. We had a big campaign just around Christmas of supporting the Chelsea Collaborative in its massive effort to feed people in Chelsea who are really suffering from the pandemic. We do all kinds of projects to try to be supportive to community organizations who are based on the idea of solidarity with people who are having a hard time. And I would encourage everyone to go to that website to participate in some of the webinars that you find interesting, because we all have our own. We all have those particular things that really are very important to us, and that's a good place. That's the place to start. Find the thing that is really important to you, get involved in it, and you will start working with people of somewhat different backgrounds, and you will learn more about issues related to it. And we just need people's energy. We need the incredible energy that we see people have when they are plugged into something that really means something to them. And Mass Peace Action is one of those places where such people can find something that they can actually work on. And we would love to have more people involved in the Raytheon Anti-War Campaign. Our network now is a couple of hundred people, and we want to build that.
Right. And as I run through Mr. Harrison's newsletter, and I love your point about being able to find something. This is literally, if you will, and I hope I'm not trivializing the efforts here, but it's literally a buffet of social action and activism here, because in 1 week you mention Assange and WikiLeaks, you mention the Middle East wars and sanctions, reparations, Iran, Korea.
Iran is tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's a really great. You got it?
Yep, absolutely. I'm gonna. It's nuclear disarmament, nuclear weapons, the people's poor, public health, the ban treaty, and what is important, ending nuclear weapons before they end us, climate, environmental justice. It ain't over. Who lives? Who? I just on and on and on. Healing from hate, music for peace. I can't imagine if you have a conscience after reading this, you can claim to be bored in the pandemic.
It's great. You see everything on Zoom too. It's great.
Yeah, no, and if there's any upside, and I hesitate to even consider these words in the same sentence, but the increased emphasis on the virtualization and taking advantage of technology in political action has been phenomenal in the last 8 or 9 months. Because people have more time, perhaps because of these challenges to their daily lives, perhaps they become more cognizant of challenges people face around the world. And but on top of that, the ability of all of these folks to make available what you once used to have to live near. I mean, let's be blunt. We're all of an age on this show right now where, you had to live near a Providence or a Cambridge or a New York City or a New Haven. I'm an East Coast guy, or Berkeley or a Boulder, Colorado, to even get a sampling of what is presented within the network of your organizations. But because we are now the Zoom generation, literally anyone, everyone, anywhere can participate in this and gain that sort of human connection with causes. And this is critical in a time like this. Causes that are bigger than themselves, bigger than the individual. They can all participate in a very real way, can't they?
Yes,
Definitely.
It is amazing that way. And so if we can combine that with the human experience of being together with each other in person, then we can really come up with something. Because that piece is a very important piece as well. But we never realized how we could be in touch with people all around the world. This international webinar on Yemen, this International Day on Yemen that you mentioned, Pat, we were all on the same webinar from 20 different countries.
Right.
It's just an amazing experience. And so we have to keep that going. And then we have to go out there and protest sometimes. We have to go out there and educate in person sometimes. And all of us have to figure out ways of working together, because this is a critical time we're living in. Not that any time is not critical, but this is a real critical time. We are on a number of fronts. We are starting to run out of time, something that we never felt before. And so this is the time for us to put aside our small issues, our small differences, and to work together on a project that we can all be proud of.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to take this message and we're going to spread it around the libertarian world. We're going to take the message to all the way down. What are we, about 30 miles apart from each other right now? All the way down to places like Charlestown, Rhode Island, and Providence, Rhode Island.
That's a great place.
I grew up in Norwood, so I was right next to Providence there.
There you go. So we're going to spread the word to foreign.
Vast reach.
So it's MassachusettsPeaceAction.org.
Right. Thanks for joining us tonight. You honor us by being here. Your efforts and your continued efforts of yours, and I hope you'll say a virtual hi to everyone in your organization, because your efforts simply make us better by example. Let's get together at least once a month, and more often when events occur or are about to occur. Feel free. I've got an open door policy here for organizations like yours. Anytime we can do anything to help promote what you're doing, you just have to let us know. And let's go out there and have some fun and kick some butt. How about that?
Yay!
Thank you.
That's a good
Sounds
idea.
good.
CoalitionRadioNetwork.com, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the original mothership at CoalitionRadio.us. Folks, you may or may not be listening to this video podcast, if you will, for the very first time. All we ask is your likes, your shares. Social media support is the mother's milk of independent media. That's how we can disseminate information like this about challenging issues of our time above the white noise, if you will, of the mainstream media. We've got a story to tell, and we're blessed to have folks like Paul and Louise tonight to help us tell it. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful evening.